If there's any new game release this year that needs no introduction, it's definitely this. That being said, Doom Eternal is an arena-style FPS with a large emphasis on a metal soundtrack and fast-paced gunplay developed by id Software. Now that I've got that out of the way, let's get to the first full-length featuring of fellatio you'll get to see from me, as I think this game is nothing short of perfect from a gameplay perspective. If ever there was a game that you could understandably impulse buy just by seeing a few gameplay trailers, it's definitely this one. And it absolutely does not hold back. The outright quality of this game's gunplay is exemplified in a few different ways, the first of which being the combat arenas, which are usually filled with jumps to help distance the player from aggressive demons, hazards to avoid while traversing a combat encounter, and good points of elevation for demons to spawn in and keep the player on their feet. The way these arenas are designed, you'd think the devs would have tried shooting up a school in Texas in the past, because the term location, location, location is burned into their thought process. Another factor that makes for great combat is the vast array of enemies the game throws at you, many of which requiring a pretty hefty sum of bullets to shell into them before they remember that being dead is sort of a theme in the afterlife. Enemies are very intricately placed in Eternal to ensure that the player will know who to prioritize, but also be constantly on the move. Enemies now also have weak points that the player can target to lower their threat level. One might shoot the cannon off of the Arachnid in order to keep the heat off them while they deal with the Hell Knight that keeps insisting attention from them. This combined with the game's destructible demons that slowly fall apart as you pump damage into them, and you have a roster of enemies that feels incredibly fearsome and badass, which only amplifies how badass you feel when you're driving their pincers into their eyes and shit. Finally, the player's tools and weapons make for some of the most engaging gameplay I've seen in a shooter, and it all melts together perfectly. You have a dash that allows you to close distances and traverse areas with ease. You have a double jump right off the bat. You have a literal flamethrower mounted on your shoulder that doubles as a grenade launcher, a blood punch that gives more use to the melee, ice bombs, and a faster chainsaw. And that's not even mentioning the guns, which have all received redesigns both visually and practically, my favorite of which being the sniper scope for the assault rifle, as it, coupled with attacking weak points, makes for super satisfying precision shots. Oh yeah, and there's also the music. Come to think of it, the entire game feels like Dusk if it was given a AAA budget, as it calls back so hard to classic FPS games with its style, paying homage to the art design and exaggerated item pickups, but with modernized gameplay and systems to show just how far we've come since then. However, it wouldn't be another review without annoying hot takes out the ass, and boy oh boy do I have one for this. For reference, I didn't pay much attention at all to the story, which I'm not using to factor into my final recommendation at the end of the video. Now, before any of you Harvard graduates in the comments stop me and go, "Oh, well, how do you expect to review the game if you didn't pay attention to the plot?" Let's all be honest in saying that the main reason we played the first game was because of how transparent it was in understanding that the player would only be interested in being elbowed deep in a demon's anal cavity. This is even more true here, as all the cutscenes are skippable, and the game couldn't give 2/3 of my left nutsack if you paid attention to the story at all. However, one thing that really annoyed me about the entire experience was the fact that almost every cutscene in the game was third person. The game seemed to try very hard to convince the player that the Slayer was his own character. Not that he can't be, but this comes to me as a confusing way to approach the story for these games. Correct me if I'm wrong, but my interest in Doom 2016 was that I was always the one going from fight to fight, killing everything in my sight, and every cutscene in the game was in first person to help build around this fantasy. Giving the Slayer a voice, face, and more defined presence in the story bogs this down and makes the experience less. Don't get me wrong, this has no impact on the way that I view the game under any other lens. It just confuses me that they would take this path when every other decision was made to make the player feel as cool as possible. Think about it. Would this cutscene feel as cool if it was in third person as opposed to first? I personally don't think so. Now, on to actual issues with the game's design. The tutorials in this game are the fucking worst. Not only are they the most intrusive and flow-breaking thing I've ever seen in my life, but they belittle the experience at some points. It's a bit of a pet peeve of mine for games to have pop-up tutorials that halt all gameplay progress when a memo in the corner of the screen would have done the job just as well. Imagine being in grade school, but every math lesson the teacher duct tapes your mouth shut and handcuffs you to your desk as she shows you every step in verifying trigonometry. Yeah, the information might get through to you, but honestly, this sounds like the perfect opening for either repressed memories or oddly specific fetishes. It's a shame, too, because I'm a huge fan of slowly finding out information for myself, as it gives me a sense of satisfaction that I did something on my own, and I can act entitled and superior because of my inherent ability to problem solve better than you, idiot. In fact, I was super excited to play through the game and slowly figure out what demon was weak to what weapons, and what my strategies would be to effectively take out each one in the heat of the moment, only for the game to then halt gameplay to tell me exactly what weapons are effective and where its weak points are against each demon. Still, despite its blatant simplicity and confusing decisions regarding the Slayer, Doom Eternal is one of the best FPS experiences I've ever had, and it surpasses 2016 in almost every way imaginable. That said, the only thing more satisfying than playing it is getting through an entire review of the game and not making a cheap joke about religion. I guess we all have our own ways of fighting our demons.
My lungs can't handle any more of this.